The diner's usual breakfast rush had slowed to a quiet lull when Eliza noticed him. A weathered man in tattered clothes who hadn't ordered anything but coffee for the past hour. When she approached to offer a refill, his trembling hands extended. A worn photograph, and the world around her suddenly collapsed into silence. The image, faded and creased from years of being carried, showed a smiling little girl with Eliza's unmistakable eyes and dimpled smile, the daughter she had been forced to give up 15 years ago when she was just a teenager herself. "I've been searching for both of you for so long," the man whispered, his voice breaking. "Girl, that's my long-lost daughter, and you're the woman I never stopped loving. What dark circumstances tore this family apart? And can 3 broken souls find healing after 15 years of separation? If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to our channel, and share your own experiences with lost connections or unexpected reunions in the comments below." Eliza felt hands guiding her to a chair as Marge, the 60-something cook with arms strong from decades of kneading dough, took charge. "Breathe, honey, that's it." The diner had fallen silent. Through blurred vision, Eliza saw the homeless man kneeling beside her, his eyes, hauntingly familiar despite the weathered face, filled with concern. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have." "Marcus?" The name felt foreign on her tongue after all these years. "Is it really you?" He nodded, the movement slight and uncertain. His beard couldn't hide the remnants of the boy she'd once loved. Time seemed suspended as memories flooded back. She'd practiced this moment in her mind, what she'd say if she ever saw him again. Now all those rehearsed words evaporated. "Everyone, show's over," Marge announced to the curious onlookers. "Eliza, take 15 in the back. I'll cover your tables." Eliza's legs trembled as she stood. "Come with me," she told Marcus, surprising herself. In the cramped break room, Eliza sat across from Marcus, the photograph between them on the scratched table. She couldn't stop staring at it. The little girl with a toothy grin wearing a yellow dress, holding a small stuffed rabbit. "Where did you get this?" Eliza asked, her voice barely audible. "It's from her adoptive family's social media," Marcus explained. "I've been trying to find her for years. Found you first, though." "You've been looking all this time?" Eliza's throat tightened. Marcus nodded, his eyes downcast. "I never wanted to give her up, Eliza. You know that." Eliza's hand instinctively moved to touch the photo, but stopped short. "Does she know about us?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But I found out where she lives, who she is now." He hesitated. "Her name is Grace." "Grace," Eliza whispered. The name felt right somehow. She'd never known what name had been given to her baby. For 15 years in her mind, she'd called her Little Bird, the nickname she'd whispered to her swollen belly during those lonely months. "I had no right to come here," Marcus continued, "but I couldn't stay away once I found out." His hands were shaking again. "I've made a mess of my life, Eliza, but finding her, finding you, it's the only thing that's kept me going." Eliza studied his face, the deep creases around his eyes, the scar above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there before, the hollow cheeks that spoke of hardship. Part of her wanted to send him away, to protect the life she'd carefully constructed. Another part, a part she thought long buried, ached to know everything. "How did you find me?" she finally asked. "Social media. That article the local paper did about the diner last year. You were in the background of one of the photos. I recognized you immediately." He attempted a smile. "You haven't changed much." But she had changed, in ways invisible to the eye. The carefree girl who had loved him was gone, replaced by a woman who kept everyone at arm's length. And Grace? "How did you find her?" "That took longer. The adoption records were sealed, but I found a lawyer who specializes in reuniting families. It took almost all the money I had, but..." He trailed off, gesturing to the photograph. "She lives just 30 miles from here, with a family named Prescott." Eliza's fingers finally touched the edge of the photograph. Her daughter was real. She had a name. She lived nearby. The knowledge was overwhelming. "What do you want, Marcus?" Eliza asked, her voice steadier now. "Why come here after all this?" "Time? I want what I've always wanted," he said simply. "A chance to know my daughter, and," he hesitated, "to apologize to you for not being there, for letting my parents send me away, for everything." The timer on Eliza's phone buzzed, signaling the end of her break. 15 minutes had passed in what felt like seconds. "I have to get back to work," she said, rising from her chair. Marcus stood too, uncertainty written across his face. "Will, you talk to me again? Please?" Eliza hesitated, then reached for a napkin and pen. She scribbled her phone number. "I'm off at 3. She slid the napkin across the table. "Don't call. Just be here if you want to talk more." As she turned to leave, Marcus asked, "Do you ever think about her? About what might have been?" Eliza paused at the door, her back to him. "Every single day," she whispered, before stepping back into the diner, leaving the photograph and its promise of reopened wounds behind. Millfield High School, 15 years earlier. Eliza Matthews tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she waited by her locker. Marcus was late again, probably held up by baseball practice. Coach Wilson always kept the team longer on Fridays, when he finally appeared jogging down the hallway with his gym bag slung over his shoulder. His smile made the wait worthwhile. "Sorry, babe," he said, planting a quick kiss on her cheek. "Wilson's obsessed with that game against Central next week." "It's okay," Eliza replied, though they both knew their time together was precious and limited. Marcus's parents, particularly his father, the stern Dr. Reed, disapproved of their relationship. The son of a prominent surgeon wasn't supposed to be wasting time with the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs. They found sanctuary in Eliza's small home when her mother worked nights. Those evenings of homework, frozen pizzas, and whispered dreams were when Eliza felt truly happy. It was during one such night, with rain pattering against the windows and her mother's ancient record player spinning Fleetwood Mac in the background, that their lives changed forever. "I'm late," Eliza whispered, curled against Marcus's chest on the worn couch. 2 weeks now. Marcus's body tensed, then relaxed as he tightened his arms around her. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." His voice held no hesitation. "I love you, Eliza. If there's a baby, then we'll be a family." The drugstore pregnancy test confirmed their suspicions the next day. Marcus held her while she cried. Not tears of regret, but of fear for the uncertain future ahead. "We'll make it work," Marcus promised. "I have some money saved. I can get more hours at the hardware store. We'll find a place." For 2 precious weeks they planned their future. Marcus sketched designs for a crib he would build. Eliza calculated budgets, figuring how she could finish school while caring for a baby. They were 17, terrified but determined. Then came the night Marcus didn't meet her after her shift at the diner. He didn't answer his phone. When she finally worked up the courage to call his house, his mother answered. "Marcus won't be speaking with you anymore," Mrs. Reed said, her voice cold. "We've enrolled him in Westridge Military Academy. He leaves tomorrow morning." "He can't," Eliza protested, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Please, I need to talk to him." "This infatuation has gone far enough," Mrs. Reed continued. "Marcus has a future to consider. College, medical school. He doesn't need distractions." "Did he tell you?" Eliza asked, her voice barely audible. "About the baby?" The silence on the other end confirmed he had. "That's precisely why he's being sent away," Mrs. Reed finally said. "We won't let him throw his life away over a teenage mistake." The line went dead. The next morning, Eliza stood across the street from the Reed mansion, watching as Marcus was escorted to the family's Mercedes by his father. Their eyes met briefly before he was pushed into the back seat. He mouthed, "I love you," as the car pulled away. Eliza's mother tried to help, but her meager salary couldn't support them both, let alone a baby. When Eliza's pregnancy became visible, the whispers at school became unbearable. She dropped out in her senior year, just months before graduation. The few letters she received from Marcus were full of promises. He would escape. He would find her. They would be together. But as her due date approached, the letters stopped coming. She gave birth alone, save for a kind nurse who held her hand through the contractions. When the nurse placed the tiny girl in her arms, Eliza knew with devastating clarity that she couldn't provide the life her daughter deserved. "She's beautiful," the social worker said 3 days later, as Eliza cradled her daughter one last time. "The couple adopting her. They've been waiting for years. They have so much love to give." Eliza memorized every detail: the perfect tiny fingernails, the dusting of dark hair, the way her eyelids fluttered during sleep. She whispered promises into her daughter's ear. promises of love, of remembrance, of the hope that someday they might meet again. When it was time, Eliza kissed her daughter's forehead and handed her to the social worker. The pen shook in her hand as she signed the papers, her tears smudging the ink. "You're doing a brave thing," the social worker assured her. But as Eliza walked out of the hospital empty-armed, she didn't feel brave. She felt hollow, incomplete, as if she'd left a vital part of herself behind. She returned to Millfield only long enough to earn her GED. Her mother had moved to Arizona for a better-paying job, but Eliza couldn't bear to leave the town where her daughter might be growing up. She drifted through a series of jobs, eventually finding stability at Marge's diner. She never stopped wondering where her little bird had flown, or if Marcus had ever tried to find them. Every year on her daughter's birthday, she bought a cupcake with a single candle and made the same wish, that her daughter was happy, loved, and someday might understand why Eliza had let her go. Marcus Reed's first escape attempt from Westridge Military Academy came 2 weeks after his arrival. He made it 30 miles before the highway patrol picked him up. His father didn't speak a word during the 3-hour drive back. The silence, more punishing than any lecture. The second attempt, a month later, ended before he even left campus. 3 months restriction followed. No phone calls, no letters, no contact with the outside world. By the time he earned back communication privileges, his desperate letters to Eliza went unanswered. He didn't know her mother had moved, taking their forwarding address with her. Each returned envelope felt like another failure. When he finally graduated and returned to Millfield, he discovered Eliza's old house occupied by strangers. No one at the school office would tell him where she'd gone. Her former friends claimed not to know. She had the baby, Jenny Carter finally told him when he cornered her outside the supermarket. "A girl, that's all I know. Where is she now?" "Where's the baby?" Jenny looked away. "She gave it up, Marcus, for adoption." The news sent him reeling. Their child, out there somewhere with strangers, and Eliza, gone. He enlisted the next day. The military offered structure when his life had none. In the harsh desert of Afghanistan, he found purpose, if not peace. He excelled as a medic, channeling his father's medical legacy without following the path laid out for him. During his second tour, an IED changed everything. The blast that took his best friend left Marcus with a traumatic brain injury, shrapnel, wounds and nightmares that medication couldn't touch. Honorable discharge papers didn't prepare him for civilian life. The VA hospital seemed more concerned with processing veterans than helping them. His parents offered their guest house with the condition he get his act together, meaning college, followed by medical school, as if the past 7 years hadn't happened. Marcus lasted 3 weeks under their roof before a screaming match with his father ended with him walking out, duffel bag over his shoulder, his service dog tags jingling in his pocket alongside the only photo he had of Eliza, their prom picture, creased from years of unfolding and refolding. The streets weren't his plan. It happened gradually, first a friend's couch, then cheaper and cheaper motels as his savings dwindled. The PTSD made holding jobs difficult. The pain made sleeping impossible without something to numb it. Pills from other vets led to stronger stuff. Before he realized it, he was the man others crossed the street to avoid. Rock bottom came on what would have been his daughter's 10th birthday. He woke in a hospital with no memory of the overdose that nearly killed him. A VA counselor sat beside his bed instead of family. "You get one more chance," the counselor said. "There's a spot in a recovery program for veterans. 6 months. Clean. Yourself up, or the next time we won't find you in time." Something about the man's directness cut through Marcus's haze. That same day, he surrendered his dog tags to the program director, a symbolic gesture of commitment. The program wasn't miracle work. Recovery came in painful increments. Withdrawal, therapy, confronting the abandonment by his parents, the loss of Eliza, the child he'd never known. "You need to make peace with your past," his counselor advised during their 4th month. "That doesn't mean forgetting, but it means accepting what you can't change and identifying what you can." "I can find them," Marcus realized aloud. "My daughter, Eliza. I can at least try." The search became his new purpose. After completing the program, he found work at a veterans center, helping others navigate the bureaucracy he'd struggled with. His evenings were devoted to the search. With a steadier income, he hired a private investigator who specialized in adoption cases. Progress came in frustrating fragments, closed adoption records, dead ends, false leads, but Marcus persisted. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a local newspaper article featuring Marge's diner. There in the background, refilling a customer's coffee, was Eliza. Older, her youthful softness replaced by a leaner strength, but unmistakably her. Finding his daughter proved more complicated. The adoption had been private, records sealed. The investigator warned him about the costs, both financial and emotional. Even if you find her, she may not want to be found, the investigator cautioned. Are you prepared for that? Marcus wasn't, but that didn't stop him. He poured every spare dollar into the search, taking extra shifts, selling his car, sleeping on a colleague's couch to save rent money. 3 years of searching led to a name, Grace Prescott, and then, miraculously, a photograph from a public school website, an award ceremony for young photographers. The moment Marcus saw her face, he knew. She had Eliza's eyes, his mother's chin, his heart. The relapse came the night he found her. One celebratory drink became many. Familiar shame followed. He checked himself into a 30-day program, emerging determined to approach his daughter the right way. Clean, honest, worthy of knowing. Before approaching Grace, he needed to find Eliza. She deserved to know first. To decide if she wanted their daughter to know about them. To have a say in reopening a chapter she might have closed. So he found himself at Marge's diner, nursing a coffee he couldn't afford, watching the woman he'd never stopped loving, gathering courage with each passing hour. The photograph of Grace burning a hole in his pocket. A second chance he probably didn't deserve but desperately wanted. At 3 o'clock, Eliza untied her apron and hung it on the hook by the kitchen door. Her hands moved mechanically through the motions of closing out her register, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd made it through her shift on autopilot, smiling. At customers, refilling coffee, taking orders, all while the photograph of her daughter burned in her memory. "You okay, honey?" Marge asked, her lined face creased with concern. In the 8 years Eliza had worked at the diner, Marge had become the closest thing to family she had. "I'm not sure," Eliza admitted. "That man today, he's Grace's father." Understanding dawned on Marge's face. Eliza had shared the bare bones of her past with her boss years ago, during a particularly difficult birthday when she'd broken down in the stockroom. "What are you going to do?" Marge asked. "Talk to him, I guess." Eliza glanced toward the front window. Marcus was sitting on a bench outside, hunched forward, staring at his hands. "He says he's found her. Our daughter." Marge squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, you know I'm here. Take tomorrow off if you need it." Eliza nodded gratefully and collected her purse from the back room. When she stepped outside, the autumn air carried a chill that matched the uncertainty in her stomach. Marcus stood when he saw her, awkward and uncertain. Up close, in the natural light, the years were even more evident on his face. He'd always been lean, but now he was thin in a way that spoke of missed meals. The expensive clothes of his youth had been replaced by worn jeans and a faded army surplus jacket. "There's a park down the block," Eliza said by way of greeting. "We can talk there." They walked in silence, a careful foot of space between them. At the park, Eliza led them to a bench overlooking a small pond where ducks glided across the surface. "Tell me everything," she said once they were seated. From the beginning, Marcus didn't hold back. He told her about the military academy, his attempts to contact her, enlisting, Afghanistan, the injury, the spiral into addiction, and the long climb back. When he spoke of hiring the investigator to find their daughter, his voice gained strength. "Had to know she was okay," he explained. "I thought if I could just see her, know that she was happy, maybe I could finally move forward." Eliza listened without interrupting, her face composed even as her heart twisted with each new revelation. When he finished, silence hung between them, broken only by the occasional quack of ducks. "What about you?" Marcus finally asked. "These past 15 years? Eliza shrugged slightly. "Not much to tell. I got my GED, worked, survived." She paused. "I tried to find her too a few years back. Couldn't afford a private investigator. The agency wouldn't tell me anything except that she was healthy and with a good family." "The Prescotts," Marcus said softly. "Robert and Charlotte. He's an architect. She teaches music at the private school where Grace goes." "Grace?" Eliza repeated. "I like the name." "Me too," Marcus hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew the photograph, offering it to her. "You should have this." Eliza took it, with trembling fingers. In the quiet of the park, she allowed herself to really look at her daughter's face. The dimples, the slight tilt of her head that reminded Eliza of her own mother. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She has your smile," Marcus said. "And she's talented. Photography. She won a regional competition last year. How do you know all this? Social media, school websites, public information?" He hastened to add, "I've never approached her, never contacted the family. I wouldn't do that without talking to you first." Eliza nodded, still staring at the photograph. "What do you want to happen now, Marcus?" He took a deep breath. "I want to meet her. I want her to know us, who we are, that we didn't abandon her out of indifference." He glanced at Eliza. "But only if you want that too, and only if it won't disrupt her life. What if her parents don't want her to know about us? Then we respect that," Marcus said, though the pain in his voice was evident. "But I think she deserves to know her own story." A breeze rippled across the pond, sending small waves toward the shore. Eliza watched a mother duck leading her ducklings in a neat line through the water. "I've imagined this moment so many times," she admitted. "Finding her. But now that it might be possible, I'm terrified." "Of what? That she'll hate me for giving her up. That she'll have questions I can't answer. That I'll disrupt the life she's built." Eliza turned to face him. "That she'll take one look at me, at us, and be disappointed." Marcus's hand moved tentatively toward hers, stopping just short of touching. "She might. I can't promise she won't, but she might also understand. She might want to know us." Eliza nodded slowly. "We should write to her adoptive parents first. They raised her. They deserve to be part of this conversation." "I agree," Marcus said, visible relief in his eyes. "We can draft something together?" "Yes." Eliza's fingers finally closed around the photograph, a decision made. "But Marcus, if we do this, if we open this door, we need to be certain. She's not a second chance for us. She's a person with her own life. We can't disappear on her again if things get hard." Marcus held her gaze steadily. "I've been sober for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. I'm in a program. I have a sponsor. I'm not going anywhere, Eliza. Not this time." The conviction in his voice touched something long dormant in Eliza's heart. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But perhaps the beginning of understanding. "One step at a time," she said. "Let's write that letter." Grace Prescott adjusted her camera lens, focusing on the autumn leaves scattered across the pristine lawn of her family's colonial-style home in Mapleton Heights. The late afternoon light created perfect shadows, turning ordinary objects into something magical. This was her favorite time to shoot, when the world transformed into something more honest than it appeared in the harsh light of midday. "Grace, dinner in 20 minutes, her mother's voice called from the back door. "Coming," Grace replied, snapping a few final shots before reluctantly packing her equipment. Inside, the Prescott home was exactly what visitors expected from a successful architect and his music teacher wife. Tasteful, comfortable, and impeccably decorated. Family photos lined the hallway, chronicling Grace's life from infancy to her current 15 years. Dance recitals, piano lessons, summer camps, the narrative of a cherished only child. Grace set her camera bag on the bench by the door and headed upstairs to wash up. Her bedroom, with its bay window overlooking the backyard maple tree, was her sanctuary. Photography awards shared shelf space with worn paperbacks and a collection of vintage cameras her father had helped her acquire from flea markets and estate sales. "Perfect timing," her mother Charlotte said as Grace entered the dining room. Charlotte Prescott, with her elegant silver-streaked dark hair and warm smile, was arranging a salad on the table. "Your father just got home." Robert Prescott hung his suit jacket on the back of his chair and rolled up his sleeves, a nightly ritual that signaled the transition from work to family time. At 48, he still had the athletic build of the college swimmer he'd once been, though his dark hair was receding at the temples. "How's my favorite photographer?" he asked, dropping a kiss on top of Grace's head. "I got some great shots of the maple leaves," Grace replied, sliding into her chair. "The light was amazing today." Dinner proceeded as it usually did. Discussions about their days, plans for the weekend, gentle teasing. It was comfortable, safe, everything a family dinner should be. Yet lately, Grace had felt a subtle undercurrent beneath this perfect surface. Questions she couldn't quite articulate formed at the edges of her mind, especially when she looked through her camera viewfinder. Photographers saw things others missed. The slight tension in a smile, the way eyes sometimes focused on something beyond the visible. Lately, she'd noticed that tension in her parents' expressions when they thought she wasn't looking. "Ms. Harrington says I need a copy of my birth certificate for the photography retreat application," Grace mentioned, as her father served himself more potatoes. "It's in your office filing cabinet, right?" A quick glance passed between her parents, so brief that Grace would have missed it if she hadn't been watching. "I'll find it tomorrow," her mother said. "Is it due soon?" "Next Friday. The retreat's in Boston. 2 weeks with professional photographers, workshops, gallery visits. Boston's far," her father commented. "We'd need to discuss that further." "Dad, it's a prestigious program. Only 20 students get selected nationwide. Ms. Harrington thinks I have a real shot." "We'll see," he replied, his standard response when he wanted to end a conversation. Later that evening, unable to sleep, Grace crept downstairs. Her father's office door was ajar, the desk lamp casting a pool of light onto the hardwood floor. She knew she shouldn't snoop, but the retreat application needed to be postmarked by Monday. Surely finding her own birth certificate wasn't really snooping? The filing cabinet yielded nothing under Grace or birth records. She turned to her father's desk, methodically checking drawers until she found a folder labeled Grace, Important Documents. Inside was her vaccination record, her social security card, and a slim envelope marked Adoption Final Decree. Grace's hands trembled as she opened it. Legal language blurred before her eyes, but certain phrases stood out with painful clarity. "Hereby, terminate all legal relations between said child and biological parents. Permanent adoptive placement with Robert James Prescott and Charlotte Ann Prescott shall henceforth be known as Grace Elizabeth Prescott." Attached was a certificate of live birth for baby girl Matthews, born to Eliza Ann Matthews, aged 17 and father unknown. Grace sat on the floor, documents scattered around her as the foundation of her identity shifted. Adopted. She was adopted. And her parents, the people she'd trusted all her life, had never told her. The sound of footsteps on the stairs jolted her back to the present. Hastily, she stuffed the papers back into the folder and returned it to the drawer. She was back, in the hallway, heart pounding when her mother appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "Grace, what are you doing up?" "Just getting some water," she managed, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen. Charlotte studied her daughter's face. "Are you feeling okay? You look pale." "I'm fine. Just working through some ideas for a photo series." Her mother seemed to accept this explanation. "Don't stay up too late. You have that study group tomorrow morning." "I won't." Back in her room, Grace lay awake staring at the ceiling. The people smiling in those hallway photographs. Had they been lying to her all along? Why hadn't they told her? And who was Eliza? Matthews? The birth certificate hadn't listed a father's name. Half her identity was a complete blank. Grace turned to her nightstand, picking up her camera. She scrolled through the photos she'd taken that day. Close-ups of maple leaves in various stages of decay, beautiful even as they fell apart. She paused on an image of her own reflection in her bedroom window, superimposed over the backyard trees, transparent, ghost-like, a girl who wasn't who she thought she was. With newfound purpose, Grace reached for her notebook and began planning a new photography project. If her parents wouldn't give her answers, perhaps her camera could help her find them. She titled the first page, Fragments, a search for identity. As she sketched out ideas, one question burned brighter than the rest. Did her birth mother ever think about her? And if Grace could find her, what would she say? 3 days after their meeting in the park, Eliza and Marcus sat at her small kitchen table, drafting their 5th attempt at a letter to the Prescotts. Crumpled papers surrounded them, each version discarded for being too emotional, too detached, too demanding, or too apologetic. "This is impossible," Eliza sighed, pushing away the latest draft. "How do you introduce yourself to the people raising your child?" "We keep trying," Marcus said simply. He'd been staying at a veterans' transitional housing facility, taking extra shifts at the center to make up for the work he'd missed. Each evening after his shift, he came to Eliza's apartment to work on the letter. Their renewed proximity was strange, intimate, yet distant. They existed in a liminal space between strangers and the teenagers who had once known each other completely. Maybe we're overthinking this, Marcus suggested. What if we just state the facts and our intentions? No emotional appeals, no grand gestures. Eliza nodded, reaching for a fresh sheet of paper. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Prescott, she began writing. Our names are Eliza Matthews and Marcus Reed. 15 years ago, we made the difficult decision to place our daughter for adoption. We have recently learned that you are the parents who adopted her, now known as Grace. She paused, looking to Marcus for guidance. We want to be clear, he continued as she wrote, that we're not seeking to disrupt your family or challenge your role as Grace's parents. You have given her the life we couldn't provide, and for that, we will be forever grateful. We are reaching out because we believe Grace might someday have questions about her origins, Eliza added. We would like to request a meeting with you, without Grace initially, to discuss if and how we might be part of her life in whatever way you feel is appropriate. They continued crafting the letter together, emphasizing their respect for the E. Prescott's position and their willingness to proceed at a pace comfortable for everyone, especially Grace. They included their contact information and brief personal details, Eliza's work at the diner, Marcus's recovery journey, and work with veterans. When they finished, they read it aloud together, making final adjustments. Do you think they'll respond? Eliza asked as she addressed the envelope. I hope so, Marcus replied. They seem like good people from everything I've learned, the kind who would want what's best for Grace. And if they don't? Marcus met her gaze steadily. Then we wait until she's 18. It's only 3 more years. 3 more years felt like an eternity to Eliza, but she nodded. They had already waited 15. They could wait longer if necessary. The next morning, Eliza mailed the letter on her way to work, her stomach knotted with anxiety and hope. For the first time in years, the carefully constructed walls around her heart had cracks, allowing both pain and possibility to seep through. Charlotte Prescott sorted through the days. Mail at the kitchen island, separating bills from catalogs and personal correspondence. An envelope with unfamiliar handwriting caught her attention. The return address showed E. Matthews and M. Reed, with a local post office box. She opened it absently, expecting a fundraising appeal or neighborhood announcement. The first sentence froze her in place. Robert, she called, her voice higher than normal. Robert, come here. Her husband appeared from his home office, reading glasses perched on his nose. What is it? Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to shock, to a carefully controlled neutrality that Charlotte recognized as his professional face, the one he used when receiving unwelcome client feedback. They found us, he said finally, setting the letter down. How is that possible? It was a closed adoption. Charlotte shook her head. Social media, probably. Grace's photos from the exhibition were in the local paper. Online presence is hard to hide these days. They stood in silence, the letter between them on the counter like an unexploded device. What are we going to do? Charlotte finally asked. Robert removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Nothing. We don't respond. Robert. We agreed, Charlotte. A closed adoption was best for everyone. Opening that door now would only confuse Grace. Charlotte picked up the letter again, studying the careful handwriting. But what if Grace finds out on her own someday? Wouldn't it be better if she heard it from us first? She won't find out if we're careful, Robert insisted. She's only 15. She's not ready for this kind of complication. Charlotte wasn't so certain. Grace had been asking subtle questions lately, showing signs of the natural curiosity about identity that many teenagers experience. She'd even mentioned wanting to try one of those DNA ancestry tests after a classmate discovered an unknown half-sibling through one. We need to think about this carefully, Charlotte said. These people, her biological parents, they're right, here in town. What if Grace bumps into them somewhere? What if someone else tells her? Robert's jaw tightened. It's not happening, Charlotte. End of discussion. He returned to his office, closing the door with deliberate softness, a controlled action that, to Charlotte, spoke louder than a slam. She reread the letter, noting the careful tone, the respect for boundaries. These people, Eliza and Marcus, sounded reasonable. The letter mentioned his work with veterans, her years at a local diner. They didn't sound like threats. Charlotte slipped the letter into her purse rather than returning it to the counter where Grace might find it. She needed time. To think, to plan. Robert might believe they could keep this contained, but Charlotte wasn't so sure. Grace noticed the shift in her parents' behavior immediately. Dinner conversation became stilted. Her father worked later than usual. Her mother checked Grace's social media accounts just to see your latest photos, though Grace suspected another motive. Something had changed, and it had happened the same week she'd discovered the adoption papers. The timing couldn't be coincidence. In her bedroom, Grace carefully arranged a series of self-portraits she'd taken for her Fragments project. Close-ups of her eyes, hands, the curve of her jaw, features that might have come from strangers, parents she'd never known. She picked up her phone, hesitating before opening a new browser tab. She'd been putting off this search, afraid of what she might find. Or not find. Eliza Matthews, she typed, adding Millfield to narrow the results. Nothing significant appeared beyond social media profiles for several Elizas, none matching what little she knew of her birth mother. Grace tried another approach, searching adoption reunion stories. The results were overwhelming. Emotional videos, advice articles, support groups. Apparently, she wasn't the only one searching for missing pieces of herself. As she scrolled through websites for adoptees, a notification popped up. Her mother, texting to ask if she wanted hot chocolate. An ordinary, loving gesture that now felt complex in new ways. Grace closed her laptop, suddenly exhausted by the weight of secrets, both those kept from her and those she now kept in return. "Yes, please," she texted back, deciding to venture downstairs. Perhaps tonight she'd gather the courage to ask the questions burning inside her. Perhaps tonight her parents would finally tell her the truth. Charlotte Prescott sat in her car outside Harmony Music Academy, where she'd just finished teaching her last piano lesson of the day. The letter from Grace's birth parents had been in her purse for 5 days now. She hadn't shown it to Grace. She hadn't responded to it, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Her phone chimed with a text from Robert. "Meeting running late. Can you pick up dinner?" Charlotte texted back an affirmative, but made no move to start the car. Instead, she pulled the letter from her purse and read it again, searching for clues about these people who shared Grace's DNA. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. A woman's hand, Charlotte guessed. Eliza Matthews. The name had haunted Charlotte for 15 years, though she'd tried to push it from her mind. The mysterious teenage girl who had given birth to the child Charlotte couldn't have herself. Charlotte had always imagined Eliza as little more than a child herself, irresponsible perhaps, or simply unable to care for a baby. It had been easier, that way, to imagine Grace's birth mother as someone clearly unsuited for parenthood. It justified their decision never to tell Grace she was adopted. But the letter painted a different picture. A woman who had made a painful choice out of love. A father who had been searching for his daughter for years. Charlotte closed her eyes, remembering the long journey that had brought Grace into their lives. 7 years of infertility treatments. The emotional roller coaster of rising hopes and crushing disappointments. The strain it had put on their marriage. Robert's suggestion, after yet another failed IVF cycle, that perhaps they weren't meant to be parents, but Charlotte couldn't accept that. The nursery was already painted, yellow with white clouds. She'd collected children's books since college. She'd always known she was meant to be a mother. Adoption had been their last hope. The process was arduous. Home studies, interviews, profile creation, waiting. So much waiting. Then the call came. A healthy baby girl had been born. The mother was a teenager who wanted a closed adoption. The father wasn't in the picture. Would they be interested? Interested. Charlotte had sobbed with joy. 48 hours later, they brought home their daughter, a tiny bundle with dark hair and solemn eyes that seemed to study everything. "She's perfect," Robert had whispered as they stood over her crib that first night. "She's ours." And she was. From that moment, Charlotte had been Grace's mother in every way that mattered. She'd nursed her through fevers, celebrated first steps, kissed skinned knees, stayed up helping with science projects. Grace was the center of their world. The adoption agency had recommended telling children about their adoption early, making it part of their story from the beginning. But Robert had been adamant. It would only confuse her, he'd argued. "She doesn't need to know. We're her parents. That's all that matters." Charlotte had agreed, though sometimes uneasily. As Grace grew, The resemblances she occasionally saw, a gesture, an expression, would momentarily startle her. Whose chin did Grace have? Whose laugh? These were questions Charlotte couldn't answer. Now those questions had faces, names. Eliza Matthews and Marcus Reed. People who could tell Grace things about herself that Charlotte couldn't, and that terrified her. Charlotte started her car and drove to Grace's favorite Thai restaurant to pick up dinner. As she waited for the order, she made a decision. She would talk to Robert again tonight. The letter deserved a response, even if that response was no. Absolutely not, Robert said that night, after Grace had gone to bed. They stood in the kitchen, voices low despite the closed door. I won't risk losing her. This isn't about us, Charlotte countered. It's about what's best for Grace. And how is introducing two strangers into her life best for her? She's 15, Charlotte. She's dealing with normal teenage stuff. School, friends, her photography. Why complicate her life with this disruption? Charlotte leaned against the counter, studying her husband. Robert's protective instinct had always been one of the things she loved about him, but sometimes it veered into control. She's going to have questions someday, Charlotte said gently. Wouldn't it be better if we control how this happens rather than having her discover it on her own? You're assuming she'll discover it, Robert replied, pacing now. The records are sealed. We've never told anyone except your sister, and she lives in Oregon. Robert, be realistic. In today's world, DNA tests, social media, secrets don't stay buried forever. He stopped pacing, bracing his hands on the kitchen island. I can't lose her, Char. I can't. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. Robert, always the strong one, the logical one, sounded genuinely afraid. We won't lose her, Charlotte assured him, moving to his side. She's our daughter. Nothing changes that. Doesn't it, though? These people, they're her real parents, biologically speaking. What if she wants to live with them? What if she decides we've been lying to her all these years and can't forgive us? Charlotte placed her hand over his. We are her real parents in every way that matters. We've raised her, loved her, been there for every moment of her life since she was 3 days old. Then why risk it? Why open this door at all? Charlotte considered her next words carefully. Because I think keeping it closed poses a greater risk. If she finds out on her own, if she learns we've kept this from her deliberately, that could hurt her more than the truth ever could. Robert straightened, a decision visible in the set of his jaw. I need time to think. Don't contact them yet. Okay, Charlotte agreed. But not too long. They deserve an answer, whatever we decide. That night, Charlotte lay awake long after Robert's breathing had evened into sleep. Her thoughts circled. Back to the letter, to its careful wording and respectful tone. These people weren't demanding anything. They were asking for a conversation. Perhaps meeting them, without Grace initially, would help Charlotte assess whether they should have a place in Grace's life. Perhaps it would put her fears to rest, or perhaps it would confirm them. What if these people were wonderful? What if Grace, upon learning about them, wanted them in her life permanently? What if Charlotte and Robert were no longer enough? Charlotte turned onto her side, watching her husband's profile in the dim light filtering through the curtains. His face, even in sleep, carried the tension of the day's revelation. She loved him. She loved their family. But she couldn't escape. The feeling that their carefully constructed world was about to change, regardless of what they decided about the letter. Some truths refused to stay hidden, no matter how deeply they were buried. The Daily Grind Cafe sat at the halfway point between Eliza's apartment and the Prescott's neighborhood, neutral territory. Charlotte had chosen it carefully when she finally responded to the letter, suggesting a meeting without Robert's knowledge. She'd told herself it was better to handle this directly, to assess the situation before involving her husband or daughter. Charlotte arrived early, selecting a corner table with enough privacy for a difficult conversation. She recognized Eliza the moment she walked in, the same dark hair and delicate features she saw in her daughter every day. A man followed close behind, tall and lean, with watchful eyes that scanned the cafe before settling on Charlotte. The biological parents of her child. The thought made Charlotte's chest tighten. Mrs. Prescott? Eliza approached the table, her voice soft but steady. I'm Eliza Matthews. This is Marcus Reed. Charlotte rose, forcing a polite smile. Please, call me Charlotte. They sat awkwardly, three strangers connected by the most intimate of bonds. Thank you for meeting with us, Marcus said after they'd ordered coffee. We weren't sure you would. My husband doesn't know I'm here. Charlotte admitted. He's not ready for this conversation. But you are? Eliza asked. Charlotte met her gaze directly. I'm not sure anyone can be ready for this conversation, but I believe it's necessary. The server delivered their coffees, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. When he left, Charlotte continued. Before we discuss anything else, I need to understand your intentions. What exactly do you want from Grace? The directness of the question seemed to catch them off guard. Eliza glanced at Marcus before answering. We don't want to disrupt her life, she said carefully. We just want a chance to know her, for her to know us, if she's interested. And if she's not interested, Charlotte pressed, then we'll respect that. Marcus responded immediately. This has to be her choice. Charlotte stirred her coffee, studying them. They seemed sincere, but good intentions weren't enough when her daughter's emotional well-being was at stake. Grace doesn't know she's adopted, she said finally. We never told her. The shock on their faces was evident. Eliza's hand tightened around her cup. She deserves to know the truth, Marcus said, his voice low but intense. That's not your decision to make, Charlotte replied sharply. With all due respect, Eliza interjected, it affects all of us. Most of all, it affects Grace. Charlotte felt a flare of anger. You gave up the right to make decisions for her 15 years ago. The words hung in the air, harsh and unretractable. Eliza flinched, as if struck, and Charlotte immediately regretted her tone. I'm sorry, she said. That was unkind, but honest, Eliza replied quietly. You're right. We did give up that right. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Something in Eliza's voice, raw pain barely contained, touched Charlotte unexpectedly. For the first time, she truly considered what it must have been like for this woman to hand over her baby, to walk away not knowing what would become of her child. Why did you? Charlotte asked. Give her up, I mean. The file just said you were young, but… Eliza looked to Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. I was 17, she began. My mother was working 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. Marcus and we were going to try to make it work, but his parents sent him away when they found out I was pregnant. I had no support, no money, not even a high school diploma. Her voice wavered slightly. I wanted her to have opportunities I couldn't. Give her a stable home, 2 parents who could provide for her. And you've given her that, Marcus added, looking at Charlotte. We've seen the articles about her photography, her school achievements. You've raised an incredible young woman. The compliment was genuine, Charlotte could tell. She felt some of her defensiveness ebbing. She is incredible, Charlotte agreed. She's the center of our world. We're not trying to take her from you, Eliza said gently. I've missed 15 birthdays. 15 Christmases. Her first words, first steps, all of it. I'm not asking to make up for lost time. I just want to know her now, today, whoever she's become. Charlotte understood that longing. Hadn't she felt the same desperation during those years of infertility? The ache to know a child, to be part of their life. My husband is afraid, Charlotte admitted. He's afraid that if Grace learns about you, she'll feel we've betrayed her by not telling her the truth, that she'll choose you over us. That's not what we want, Marcus insisted. You're her parents. You've earned that title in all the ways that matter. We're just additional people who care about her. Charlotte studied him, noting the sincerity in his expression. He'd cleaned up for this meeting, hair neatly trimmed, clothes modest but presentable. She'd expected to dislike him on principle, this man who shared her daughter's DNA. Instead, she found herself recognizing pieces of Grace in him. The determined set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze when discussing something important. Tell me about yourselves, Charlotte said finally. What you do, your lives. If I'm going to consider introducing you to my daughter, I need to know who you are. They spoke openly. Eliza's steady job at the diner, her night classes in nursing. Marcus's struggle with addiction after military service, his current work helping other veterans navigate the system that had initially failed him. Their separate journeys that had led them back to each other through their search for Grace. I was angry for a long time, Marcus admitted, at my parents for separating us, at myself for not fighting harder to find Eliza and the baby. Finding Grace, it gave me purpose, a reason to get clean, stay clean. Is that why you want to meet her? Charlotte asked. For your own healing? Partly, he acknowledged, his honesty surprising her, but mostly because I think she deserves to know her full story, to make her own choices about who she wants in her life. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text from Robert, asking where she was, the real world intruding on this surreal conversation. "I need to go," she said, gathering her purse. "This is a lot to process." "We understand," Eliza said. "Thank you for meeting with us." Charlotte paused, making a decision she hoped she wouldn't regret. "I need to talk to my husband. And then, if he agrees, we need to tell Grace the truth before any meeting happens. She deserves to hear it from us first." The relief on their faces was palpable. "How long do you think that might take?" Marcus asked carefully. "I don't know," Charlotte admitted. "But I'll contact you within the week, regardless of our decision." She hesitated. "If we do this, if we tell her about you, there's no predicting how she'll react. She might not want to meet you, at least not right away." "No," Eliza said softly. "We're prepared for that possibility." As Charlotte walked to her car, she felt oddly lighter despite the difficult conversation ahead with Robert. These people, Eliza and Marcus, weren't the threats she'd feared. They were simply people who loved her daughter from afar, as she had once loved Grace before holding her in her arms. The truth was complicated, messy, but perhaps less destructive than the secrets they'd been keeping. Grace knew something was wrong the moment she came downstairs for dinner. The dining room table, usually set for their meals, was bare. Instead, her parents sat in the living room, her father in his leather armchair, her mother on the edge of the sofa. The coffee table between them held a folder and what appeared to be a letter. "Grace," her mother said, patting the space beside her, "come sit with us. We need to talk to you about something important." The formal arrangement sent a chill through Grace. Had someone died? Was someone ill? Were they moving? Or, the thought struck her suddenly, had they found out that she knew about the adoption? She sat beside her mother, instinctively pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. "Whatever it is, just tell me," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Her parents exchanged a glance that contained an entire conversation. Her father nodded slightly, and her mother took a deep breath. "Gracie, there's something we should have told you a long time ago," Charlotte began, taking Grace's hand in hers. "Something about how you came to be part of our family." Grace felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. So this was about the adoption. They were finally going to tell her the truth. "You were adopted," her father said, his voice gentler than Grace had ever heard it. "We adopted you when you were just a few days old." Grace looked between them, uncertain how to respond. Should she pretend surprise? Should she admit she already knew? "Say something, sweetheart," her mother urged. I know," Grace finally admitted. "I found the papers in Dad's office a couple weeks ago, when I was looking for my birth certificate for the photography retreat application." Her father's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "You've known for 2 weeks? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell me for 15 years? Grace countered, surprising herself with the edge in her voice. A heavy silence descended on the room. Her mother squeezed her hand. "That's fair," Charlotte acknowledged. "We should have." "Told you much earlier. That was a mistake, and I'm so sorry." "We thought we were protecting you," her father added. "We didn't want you to feel different, less ours." Grace pulled her hand away from her mother's, needing space to process. "Who are they? My birth parents?" Her parents exchanged another loaded glance. "Her name is Eliza Matthews," her mother said carefully. "She was 17 when she had you. Your biological father is Marcus Reed. He was sent away to military school when Eliza was pregnant. They were teenagers." Grace tried to imagine it. 2 people her age, facing the prospect of parenthood. Her father nodded, very young, with no means to support a child. "Where are they now?" Grace asked, the question that had haunted her since finding the adoption. "Papers." Another silent exchange between her parents, this one tenser than before. "They've found us," her mother said finally. "They wrote us a letter. They're both living here in Millfield." Grace felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. Here, in the same town. All this time, she might have passed them on the street, stood behind them in line at the grocery store, unaware of the connection they shared. "They want to meet you," her father added, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "But that's completely your decision. You don't have to if you don't want to." Grace reached for the letter on the coffee table. Her mother handed it to her without protest. As she read, Grace tried to imagine the people behind the careful words. They sounded respectful, considerate, aware of the complexity of the situation. "What are they like?" she asked, looking up from the letter. Her mother hesitated. "I've met them." "What?" Her father's shock mirrored Grace's own. "When?" "Last week," Charlotte admitted. "I needed to see them for myself, to understand their intentions before we had this conversation." "And you didn't tell me?" Robert's voice rose slightly. "I was going to," Charlotte said calmly. "But I wanted to form my own impression first." Grace interrupted before her father could respond. "So, what are they like?" Her mother turned back to her. "They're ordinary people who've had some extraordinary challenges. Eliza works at a diner downtown. She's taking nursing classes. Marcus is a veteran who helps other veterans navigate the VA system." She paused. "They seem sincere in their desire to know you, but also respectful of our family." Grace tried to absorb this information, to match these descriptions with the vague shapes that had occupied her imagination. A waitress, a veteran, real people with real lives. "Why now?" she asked. "After 15 years?" "Marcus has been searching for you for some time," her mother explained. "He found you first through your photography in the local paper. Then he found Eliza. They decided to reach out together." Grace stood abruptly, needing to move. She paced the living room, aware of her parents watching her anxiously. "I need time," she said finally, "to think about all this." "Of course," her father said quickly. "There's no rush. Take all the time you need." But Grace could feel the weight of expectations, her parents' fears, these strangers' hopes, pressing down on her. She needed space away from all of them to sort through her feelings. "I'm going to my room," she announced, turning toward the stairs. "Grace," her mother called after her. "We love you. That has never changed, not for a single moment since we first held you." Grace paused on the stairs, not turning around. "I know that, Mom." Despite her confusion, that much was true. Whatever else was happening, her parents' love had been the one constant in her life. In her bedroom, Grace sat on her bed, trying to make sense of her conflicting emotions. Relief at finally having the truth acknowledged. Anger at 15 years of secrecy. Curiosity about the people who had created her. Fear about what meeting them might mean. She picked up her camera, finding comfort in its familiar weight. Through the viewfinder, the world became manageable, framed, and contained. She focused on her reflection in the window. A girl caught between identities, between families, between the past and an uncertain future. She took the shot, capturing that moment of suspension. Then she reached for her laptop and typed a new title for her photography project. Origins, A Journey of Discovery. Whatever she decided about meeting Eliza and Marcus, Grace knew one thing with certainty. She would document every step of this journey, preserving these moments of transformation through her lens. If she couldn't control the upheaval in her life, she could at least bear witness to it. Eliza's phone rang 3 days after the meeting with Charlotte. She was between shifts at the diner, using her break to study for her anatomy exam. The unfamiliar number made her heart skip. "Hello? Eliza? This is Charlotte Prescott." Eliza gripped the phone tighter. "Charlotte, hi. We told Grace," Charlotte said without preamble, "about being adopted, about you and Marcus." Eliza sat down on the bench outside the diner. "How did she take it?" "It's complicated. She actually already knew about the adoption. She found the papers recently. She was waiting for us to tell her." Charlotte paused. "She's been processing everything for a few days. Yesterday she said she wants to meet you both." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eliza. "She does?" "Yes. She has questions, naturally. She wants to understand where she comes from." Charlotte's voice softened. "She's a thoughtful girl. She doesn't rush into things." "When?" Eliza managed to ask, her throat tight. "This Saturday. There's a park near our house. Riverside Park. By the gazebo at noon. It's public, but quiet enough for conversation. We'll be there," Eliza promised. "Thank you, Charlotte. I know this can't be easy for you and Robert." "It's not," Charlotte admitted. "But I believe it's right for Grace. That's what matters most." After hanging up, Eliza immediately called Marcus, who was between appointments at the Veterans Center. "Saturday," she repeated when he answered. "We're meeting her on Saturday." "I'll request the day off," he said, his voice steady despite the enormity of the news. "Do you think we should bring anything?" A gift seems inappropriate but empty-handed. Feels wrong too. Eliza hadn't considered this. I don't know. What do you bring to meet the daughter you haven't seen in 15 years? Maybe photographs, Marcus suggested. Of us when we were younger. If she's curious about where she comes from, that's a good idea. Eliza glanced at her watch. Break's almost over. Can you come over tonight? We should plan what we're going. To say, I'll be there at 7. Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror at the Veterans Transitional Housing Facility, critically assessing his reflection. He'd gotten a haircut yesterday. Today he'd splurged on a new button-down shirt. Dark. Blue, nothing flashy. His jeans were his cleanest pair, and he'd polished his only decent shoes. Big day? Asked Thomas, another resident, passing in the hallway. Meeting my daughter, Marcus replied, the words still surreal. For the first time since she was born. Thomas whistled low. That's heavy, man. Good luck. Marcus nodded, returning to his scrutiny. The face that looked back at him carried the marks of his difficult years. Lines around his eyes, a small scar near his temple from the IED blast, the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent too much time outdoors in all conditions. Would Grace see any of herself in him, or would she see only a stranger? He tucked the envelope of photographs into his pocket. Himself and Eliza at 17, at the spring dance. A photo of his parents' house where he'd grown up. A shot of him in uniform before his first deployment. Fragments of the life that had led to this moment. His sponsor had advised him to manage his expectations. Don't go in thinking this will solve everything, Jim had cautioned during their meeting yesterday. She might need time. She might have tough questions. She might be angry. Marcus understood that. He had no right to expect anything from Grace, but still, hope fluttered in his chest. Fragile, persistent. Eliza changed her outfit 3 times before settling on a simple dress with a cardigan. She wanted to look put together, but not like she was trying too hard. Her hands trembled as she applied a light touch of makeup, something she rarely bothered with for work. On her dresser sat the small box she'd retrieved from storage yesterday. Inside was the only item she'd kept from her pregnancy, a tiny yellow knitted hat that her mother had made before moving to Arizona. Grace had never worn it. Eliza had been told not to bring anything personal to the hospital for the handover, but she'd kept it all these years, this tangible reminder of the child she'd carried. She wouldn't bring it today. It was too much, too soon. But knowing it was here, that this connection had been preserved even when everything else was lost, it steadied her somehow. Her apartment felt too small suddenly, the walls closing in with the weight of anticipation. She'd cleaned compulsively yesterday, though she knew Grace wouldn't be coming here. The activity had helped channel her nervous energy. Checking the time, Eliza gathered her purse and the small photo album she'd assembled. Marcus would be picking her up in 20 minutes. They decided to arrive at the park early, to settle their nerves before Grace and her parents arrived. As she waited, Eliza found herself unconsciously touching her abdomen, remembering the feeling of carrying Grace beneath her heart. 15 years had passed since she'd held her newborn daughter, memorizing her features before saying goodbye. Now she would see the young woman that baby had become. Grace stood before her closet, camera in hand, documenting the process of choosing what to wear to meet her birth parents. Each outfit she considered became part of her Origins project. Visual, fragments of her preparation for this momentous encounter. She finally selected jeans and a green top that her mother always said brought out her eyes. She wondered if her eyes came from Eliza or Marcus. Would they notice the resemblance immediately? Would they see pieces of themselves in her face, her gestures, her expressions? Grace, her mother knocked softly. We should leave in about 30 minutes. I'll be ready, Grace called back. She sat at her desk, flipping through the questions she'd carefully written out last night. Some were practical, medical history, genetic traits, extended family. Others were more difficult. Why didn't you try to find me sooner? Did you ever regret your decision? Would you have kept me if circumstances had been different? She wasn't sure she'd have the courage to ask the harder questions today. Maybe it was better to start with the easier ones, to establish some foundation. Before delving deeper, her father had been quiet all morning, moving through the house like a ghost. Grace knew this was hardest for him. Her mother had at least met Eliza and Marcus, had some measure of the people they would be encountering. Her father was walking into the unknown, facing his deepest fear, that the daughter he'd raised might find connection with a biological father who could claim a blood bond he couldn't match. Grace tucked her notebook into her bag alongside her camera. Whatever happened today, she would document it, not just with questions and answers, but with images that captured the emotional truth of this reunion. Downstairs, her parents waited by the door. Her mother smiled encouragingly. Her father checked his watch, his expression carefully neutral. "Ready?" Charlotte asked. Grace nodded, though ready was the last thing she felt. How could anyone be ready for a moment like this? "Let's go," she said simply, stepping into the bright autumn sunlight, moving toward a meeting 15 years in the making. Riverside Park glowed golden in the midday sun, autumn leaves drifting lazily from the maples that lined the pathways. Marcus and Eliza arrived 30 minutes early, settling on a bench with a clear view of the gazebo where they would meet Grace. Neither spoke much, the weight of anticipation too heavy for casual conversation. "There they are," Marcus said suddenly, straightening beside Eliza. She followed his gaze to see 3 figures walking along the path. Charlotte, whom she recognized immediately, a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair who must be Robert, and, between them, a slender girl with a camera hanging around her neck. Grace. Eliza's breath caught. Even at a distance, the resemblance was unmistakable. Grace had Marcus's height and lean build, Eliza's dark hair, and the slight tilt of her head that Eliza's mother had always pointed out in photographs. "She's beautiful," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As they approached the gazebo, Eliza and Marcus rose from the bench, both moving with the careful deliberation of people trying not to startle a wild creature that might bolt at any sudden movement. The 5 of them converged at the gazebo steps. For a long moment, no one spoke, the significance of the moment rendering words inadequate. Charlotte broke the silence. "Grace, this is Eliza Matthews and Marcus Reed. Eliza, Marcus, this is our daughter Grace." Grace stood slightly behind her parents, her expression a carefully controlled mask that revealed nothing of her inner thoughts. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her camera. "It's good to meet you, Grace," Eliza said softly, resisting the overwhelming urge to embrace the girl. "Thank you for agreeing to this." Grace nodded once, her eyes moving between Eliza and Marcus, studying them with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging every detail. "Maybe we should sit," Charlotte suggested, gesturing to the gazebo's built-in benches. They arranged themselves awkwardly, Robert and Charlotte on one side with Grace between them, Eliza and Marcus facing them. The gazebo's openness provided the illusion of privacy, while still being completely public. "Your mother mentioned you're a photographer," Marcus said to Grace, attempting to break the ice. Grace glanced at her camera. "Yes, that's really cool. I've always admired people with artistic talent." A flicker of interest crossed Grace's face. "Do you take pictures?" Marcus shook his head. "No, but I draw sometimes. Nothing serious, just sketches." "He's being modest," Eliza interjected. "Marcus used to draw these amazing detailed landscapes. He once drew the entire mill field downtown from memory." Marcus looked surprised that she remembered. The moment created a brief, unexpected connection, a shared history that predated the present tension. Grace unzipped her bag, withdrawing a small notebook. "I have some questions," she said, her voice steadier now. "If that's okay?" "Of course," Eliza replied. "Anything you want to know?" Grace hesitated, looking down at her prepared list. "Medical history first. Are there any conditions that run in your families I should know about?" Eliza appreciated the practical starting point. They covered the basics: Marcus's family history of hypertension, Eliza's grandmother's rheumatoid arthritis, their general good health otherwise. "Is there a history of depression or other mental health issues?" Grace asked, her tone clinical, but her eyes watchful. Marcus answered honestly about his PTSD and struggles with addiction. "It's important you know about that," he said, "both for medical reasons and just to understand part of why I wasn't able to find you sooner." Grace made notes, her expression giving nothing away. "And on your side?" she asked Eliza. "My mother had postpartum depression after I was born," Eliza said. "It was never formally diagnosed, but looking back, I recognize the signs." Grace nodded, making another note. The methodical approach seemed to be helping her maintain composure. "What about extended family? Do I have grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins?" The question added another layer of complexity. Eliza explained about her mother in Arizona, who knew about Grace but had never met her. Marcus hesitated before discussing his parents. My parents? They're still in Millfield. They don't know about this meeting. Our relationship has been strained for many years, partly because of how they handled the situation when Eliza was pregnant. Grace looked up from her notebook. They didn't want you to have me. It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. They were focused on what they thought was best for my future. They couldn't see that you were my future. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've never forgiven them for separating me from Eliza and from you, but that's my issue to resolve, not yours. The honesty seemed to register with Grace. She glanced at Robert, whose expression remained carefully neutral, though his hand had tightened on the bench beside him. Charlotte gently steered the conversation. Grace, maybe you'd like to tell Eliza and Marcus a little about yourself, your photography, your interests? Grace hesitated, then spoke about her recent photography projects, her voice gradually becoming more animated. I'm working on a series called Origins right now, she explained. It's about identity and how we understand ourselves through fragments of the past. That sounds incredible, Eliza said sincerely. I'd love to see it sometime. It's not finished, Grace replied, but added, maybe when it is. The tentative offer hung in the air. A possible future meeting. A door left slightly ajar. We brought some photographs, Marcus said, reaching into his pocket for the envelope. If you're interested, just some pictures of us when we were younger. Around your age, actually. Grace accepted the envelope, her fingers careful as she removed the photos. She studied the image of Eliza and Marcus at 17, standing together before a school dance. You were so young, she said quietly. We were, Eliza agreed. Just kids ourselves. Grace looked up, meeting Eliza's eyes directly for the first time. Why did you give me up? The real reason. The question they'd been expecting. But still it landed with force. Eliza took a deep breath. Because I wanted you to have more than I could give you, she said simply. A stable home, opportunities, 2 parents who could provide for you properly. I was 17 with no money, no support system after Marcus was sent away. My mother was barely keeping us afloat. I would have dropped out of school to work, Marcus added. We would have struggled constantly. And while I believe we would have loved you completely, love isn't always enough. He glanced at Robert and Charlotte. We wanted better for you than what we could offer then. Do you regret it? Grace asked, her voice smaller now. Eliza felt tears threatening but forced them back. I regret that circumstances made it necessary. I regret missing your childhood. But when I see the young woman you've become, the opportunities you've had, she shook her head. I can't regret the outcome, even if the process broke my heart. Grace nodded slowly, absorbing this. She turned to her adoptive parents. Can I have a few minutes to talk with them alone? Robert looked startled, Charlotte concerned. Are you sure, honey? Charlotte asked. Yes, just a few minutes. After a moment's hesitation, Robert and Charlotte stood. We'll be right over there, Robert said, pointing to a nearby bench with a clear view of the gazebo. When they were out of earshot, Grace turned back to Eliza and Marcus. There are things I don't want to ask in front of them, she explained. They've been good parents. I don't want to hurt them. We understand, Marcus assured her. Grace's composed facade cracked slightly. Did you ever try to find me before now? Yes, Eliza said. When you were about 8, I contacted the adoption agency. They wouldn't tell me anything except that you were healthy and with a good family. I couldn't afford to hire someone to search further. I started looking as soon as I got clean, Marcus added. About 5 years ago. It took a long time to find enough information. Grace absorbed this, then asked the question that seemed to cost her the most. If things had been different, if Marcus hadn't been sent away, if you'd had more support, would you have kept me? The raw vulnerability in her voice made Eliza's chest ache. Yes, she said without hesitation. We would have. Grace nodded once, blinking rapidly. I should get back to my parents, she said, rising from the bench. Thank you for answering my questions, Grace, Marcus said as she turned to leave. However much or little you want us in your life, that's completely up to you. No pressure. No expectations. I need time, she replied, to think about everything. Take all the time you need, Eliza assured her. We're not going anywhere. They watched as Grace rejoined Robert and Charlotte. The 3 of them walked slowly back along the path, Grace between her parents, her head bent close to Charlotte's as they spoke. She's amazing, Eliza whispered when they were out of sight. Everything I could have hoped for her. They've done well by her, Marcus agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Better than we could have at 17. Eliza nodded, feeling the complex mixture of gratitude and grief that had become familiar over the past weeks. Do you think she'll want to see us again? I hope so, Marcus said simply. But even if this is all we get, one meeting, a few answers, it's more than we had yesterday. Eliza leaned against him slightly, accepting the comfort of his presence. The future remained uncertain, but for now, this moment, having finally seen the daughter they'd created and lost and found again, was enough. The next meeting happened 2 weeks later, at a small coffee shop downtown. Grace had suggested it, texting Eliza from a new number her parents had helped her get specifically for this purpose. Just Grace and her birth parents this time, without the buffer of Robert and Charlotte. I want to get to know them on my own terms, Grace had explained to her adoptive parents. I need to figure out who they are to me. Charlotte had understood, or at least pretended to. Robert had struggled more with the idea, but ultimately respected Grace's wishes. Their family therapist, engaged promptly after the first meeting, had encouraged giving Grace appropriate independence in navigating these new relationships. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide background noise, but quiet enough for conversation. Grace arrived first, securing a corner table and setting up her camera beside her notebook. When Eliza and Marcus entered, Grace's pulse quickened. It was still jarring to see her own features reflected in these strangers. Marcus's height and the shape of his hands, Eliza's cheekbones and eyes. Is it okay if I take some pictures? Grace asked after they'd ordered drinks. For my project. Of course, Eliza replied, though she looked nervous. I don't exactly photograph well, Marcus added with a self-deprecating smile. Grace raised her camera, focusing on their hands wrapped around their coffee cups. I'm not looking for perfect poses, just authentic moments. As she photographed, she asked questions, easier ones this time. What were they like as teenagers? How had they met? What were their favorite subjects in school? The stories emerged. Gradually, Marcus and Eliza meeting in sophomore English class when paired for a project on Romeo and Juliet. Their first date at the old movie theater downtown that now showed classic films on weekends. Eliza's passion for science that she was now pursuing through nursing school. Marcus's talent for drawing that he'd rediscovered during recovery. I have some of my recent sketches, Marcus offered tentatively, pulling out a small sketchbook. If you'd like to see them. Grace accepted the book, studying the detailed pencil drawings, landscapes, buildings, a particularly striking portrait of Eliza at the diner counter. These are really good, she said, genuinely impressed. You have a natural eye for composition. That must be where you get your visual talent, Eliza suggested. Grace considered this. The idea that pieces of herself might be explained by these people she was just beginning to know. It was both comforting and unsettling. Maybe, she acknowledged. My dad, Robert, he has a good eye too. He's an architect. That makes sense, Marcus said. Different mediums, same fundamental understanding of space and form. Grace appreciated that he didn't try to minimize Robert's influence. It made the conversation feel safer somehow. Their meetings became semi-regular over the following weeks, sometimes at the coffee shop, sometimes walking through the park, once at the art museum when a photography exhibition opened that Grace wanted to see. Gradually, the initial awkwardness faded. Grace found herself looking forward to these encounters. Curious about these people who were neither strangers nor family, something in between for which she had no adequate label. During their fourth meeting, Eliza brought a small envelope. I found these recently, she explained, handing it to Grace. Photos of my mother, your biological grandmother. She lives in Arizona now. We're not close, but she's part of your history too. Grace studied the photographs of a woman with Eliza's dark hair and her own dimpled smile. Another piece of the puzzle, another branch of a family tree she was only beginning to map. Thank you, she said simply, carefully adding them to her growing collection. How are you feeling about all this? Charlotte asked one evening, sitting on the edge of Grace's bed as she had when Grace was younger. Grace considered the question carefully. It's strange. Good strange mostly, but still strange. They're like puzzle pieces that help me understand myself better. But they're not you and Dad. Charlotte nodded, visibly relieved. Your father worries. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. I know. Grace had noticed her father's careful questions after each meeting, his studied casualness masking genuine concern. But he doesn't need to. You're my parents. That doesn't change just because I know them now. Charlotte hugged her daughter, holding on a moment longer than usual. I'm proud of how you're handling this. It can't be easy. It's not, Grace admitted. But I think it's important. For all of us. During their 6th meeting, Grace brought her laptop to show Marcus and Eliza some of her recent photographs, including several from their previous encounters. This is part of my Origins series, she explained, scrolling through images, close-ups of their hands, Marcus's profile against a window, Eliza's reflection in a spoon, abstract shots that somehow captured the tentative nature of their developing relationship. These are beautiful, Grace, Eliza said softly. You have a real gift. My photography teacher thinks I should submit the series to a student exhibition next month, Grace said. But I'm not sure if I'm ready to share something this personal. Whatever you decide, Marcus assured her. The work is extraordinary. Grace hesitated before asking her next question. If I do exhibit them, would you come? Both of you? The invitation hung in the air between them, a significant step beyond their private meetings. We'd be honored, Eliza said carefully. But what about Robert and Charlotte? Would they be comfortable with us being there? Grace had considered this. I think so. I hope so. It's important to me to have everyone who's part of this journey there. Marcus and Eliza exchanged a glance that Grace had come to recognize. A silent communication developed during their shared history. Then we'll be there, Marcus promised. Just let us know when and where. As they parted that day, Eliza hesitated before asking, would it be okay if I hugged you goodbye? It's completely fine if you're not comfortable with that yet. Grace considered the request. Physical contact had remained limited to handshakes until now, an unspoken boundary maintaining necessary distance. After a moment, she nodded. Okay. Eliza's embrace was gentle and brief, but Grace felt something shift inside her at the contact, a connection that transcended the careful conversations and shared photographs. Not quite maternal, but significant nonetheless. Thank you, Eliza, whispered before stepping back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Walking home, Grace tried to sort through her conflicting emotions. She was developing genuine affection for these people who had created her, given her away, and found her again. But navigating the complex web of relationships, honoring her parents while creating space for Eliza and Marcus, required constant vigilance and care. Her exhibition would bring all these separate worlds together for the first time. Grace wasn't sure if they were ready, if she was ready. But perhaps readiness wasn't the point. Perhaps the messy, complicated reality of their situation couldn't be neatly prepared for, only lived through, one careful step at a time. The Millfield Arts Center buzzed with activity as students and their families arrived for the annual Young Artists exhibition. Grace stood before her display, a carefully arranged collection of 20 photographs titled Origins Fragments of Identity. The black and white images formed a visual narrative, beginning with abstract self-portraits and moving through to the more recent photos of Eliza and Marcus. Ms. Harrington, the photography teacher who had encouraged Grace to submit her work, stopped to admire the display. This is powerful, Grace. Your best work yet. Thank you, Grace replied, adjusting the placement of her artist's statement. A brief explanation of the project that alluded to her adoption without explicitly detailing her personal story. Charlotte and Robert arrived first, dressed for the occasion. Her father carried a bouquet of yellow roses, Grace's favorite. It looks wonderful, sweetheart, Charlotte said, embracing her daughter. Robert studied the photographs, his expression thoughtful as he recognized the progression from Grace's early confusion upon discovering her adoption to the gradual exploration of her biological heritage. You've captured something profound here, he said finally. I'm proud of you. His approval meant more than Grace had anticipated. She squeezed his hand gratefully. Are they coming? Charlotte asked quietly, scanning the growing crowd. They said they would, Grace confirmed, trying to hide her nervousness. This would be the first time all 4 parents were together since the initial meeting at the park. 20 minutes later, Eliza and Marcus arrived. They'd made an effort with their appearance, too. Eliza in a simple dress Grace hadn't seen before, Marcus in a button-down shirt and the only tie he owned. They carried a small gift bag. Grace made the awkward introductions, watching as the four adults exchanged stiff pleasantries. The undercurrent of tension was palpable, but everyone was making a visible effort to be civil for her sake. "Let me show you the exhibit," Grace suggested, leading them to her display. Eliza moved slowly along the line of photographs, pausing at each one. When she reached a close-up of her own hands wrapped around a coffee cup, juxtaposed with a similar shot of Grace's hands holding her camera, her eyes glistened. "You've created something remarkable here," she said softly. Marcus nodded agreement, studying a photograph where his profile was blurred against a bright window, creating a ghostly effect. "You've captured exactly how this has felt, like gradually coming into focus." "That's what I was trying to express," Grace confirmed. Pleased they understood. Robert and Charlotte stood slightly apart, their expressions complex as they viewed the visual representation of the journey their daughter had undertaken. A journey that necessarily involved people outside their family unit. As other visitors moved through the exhibition, several of Grace's classmates approached, curious about her project, and the group gathered around it. "These are amazing, Grace," said Lily, her closest friend. "So personal. Are these your relatives?" The question hung awkwardly in the air. Grace hesitated, suddenly aware she hadn't prepared for this moment. How to explain these relationships to people who didn't know her story? "Yes," Charlotte answered smoothly, saving Grace from the dilemma. "We're all Grace's family." The simple statement, delivered without qualification, eased some of the tension. Even Robert's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Cool," Lily replied, oblivious to the significance of the moment. "My parents couldn't even be in the same room after their divorce. This is way more civilized." After Lily moved on, an uncomfortable silence fell over the group. "Maybe we should look at some of the other exhibits," Charlotte suggested tactfully. "Give Grace a chance to talk with her classmates." As the adults moved away, Grace noticed Marcus and her father standing before a landscape painting, engaged in what appeared to be an actual conversation. Eliza and Charlotte had drifted toward the refreshment table, maintaining a polite distance. Grace was photographing a visitor's reaction to her display when she overheard a classmate's mother nearby. "Which ones are her real parents?" the woman whispered to her husband, not quite quietly enough. "The younger couple, I think," the husband replied. "They look more like her." Grace stiffened, her camera freezing midway to her eye. Before she could decide how to respond, another voice spoke. They're all her real parents." Grace turned to see Dominic, a quiet boy from her calculus class who rarely spoke up in social situations. "Excuse me?" the woman said, flustered at being overheard. "They're all her real parents," Dominic repeated firmly. "Some biology, some upbringing. All real." He nodded to Grace and moved on, leaving the couple embarrassed. Grace felt a surge of gratitude for his simple defense, along with renewed anxiety about navigating these public intersections of her complex family situation. As the evening progressed, she observed the careful dance performed by the four adults in her life, the measured politeness, the occasional moments of genuine connection, the underlying current of competitive affection. It was exhausting to witness, and she could only imagine how draining it was for them to maintain. When the exhibition began winding down, Eliza and Marcus approached to say goodbye. "This was wonderful, Grace," Eliza said. "Thank you for including us." Marcus handed her the small gift bag. "Just a little something to celebrate your first exhibition." Inside was a handmade leather camera strap with GP subtly embossed on the underside. The craftsmanship was excellent, the leather supple and clearly of good quality. "Marcus made it," Eliza explained. "He's been taking a leatherworking class at the Veterans Center." "You made this?" Grace asked, genuinely impressed. Marcus nodded, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "It's therapeutic. Working with your hands. It's beautiful," Grace said sincerely. "Thank you." After they left, Grace rejoined her parents, who were helping her gather her things as the exhibition closed. "That went better than I expected," Charlotte admitted as they walked to the car. Robert was quieter, but not angry. "He seems to care about you," he said finally. "Marcus," the camera strap showed thought. It was as close to approval as Grace could have hoped for from her father. She squeezed his arm affectionately. "Thanks for coming," she said to both of them. "I know it wasn't easy." "We're your parents," Robert replied simply. "We'll always be there no matter how complicated things get." In the car heading home, Grace scrolled through the photographs she'd taken that evening, candid shots of visitors viewing her work, a few surreptitious images of her 4 parents in various combinations. New material for her ongoing project. 1 photograph in particular caught her attention, a moment she hadn't even realized she'd captured. Robert and Marcus standing side by side, looking at her display, their profiles turned toward her work, with identical expressions of pride. 2 fathers, different in almost every way, connected only through their shared love for her. Grace saved the image to a special folder. This one wasn't for exhibition. This one was just for her. A visual reminder that family could be more complex and more expansive than she'd ever imagined. The text message came at 2:17 a.m., jolting Eliza from sleep. It was from Marcus, rambling, misspelled, nearly incoherent. Something about being sorry, about failing everyone again. Eliza called immediately, her heart pounding. No answer. She tried 3 more times before pulling on clothes and grabbing her keys. She'd been to Marcus's transitional housing facility once before, dropping him off after a meeting with Grace. She remembered the address. The night manager recognized her description of Marcus. He left around midnight, the man informed her. Seemed upset. Wouldn't talk about it. Did he say where he was going? The man shook his head. Sorry. Eliza drove through Millfield's deserted streets, checking places Marcus had mentioned. The park where they'd met Grace, the Veterans Memorial downtown, the all-night diner where he sometimes went when sleep evaded him. She finally found his familiar figure slumped on a bench outside the bus station, a half-empty bottle beside him. The sight hit her like a physical blow. 8 months of sobriety gone in a single night. Marcus, she said softly, approaching slowly. He looked up, his eyes unfocused. Shouldn't have called you, he slurred. Shouldn't bother anyone. What happened? Eliza sat beside him, maintaining a small distance. Got the letter today. Rejection. He fumbled in his pocket, producing a crumpled envelope. Housing application. Permanent apartment. They said my history makes me a risk. Eliza understood immediately. Marcus had been working toward moving out of transitional housing, finding a place of his own, a stable home where he might someday host Grace for visits. The rejection had triggered a spiral. I'm so sorry, she said, but this isn't the answer, Marcus. He stared at the bottle beside him, as if seeing it for the first time. I know, he whispered. I wanted to stop feeling like a failure. For one night. You're not a failure. Tell that to Grace, he said bitterly. Her real father's an architect with a beautiful home. Her birth father can't even get approved for a 1-bedroom apartment. Grace doesn't care about that, Eliza insisted. She cares about knowing you, understanding where she comes from. She deserves better than this. Marcus gestured vaguely at himself. Better than me. Eliza moved closer, placing her hand over his. She deserves the truth. And the truth is you're a good man who's fighting hard against difficult circumstances. Even good men stumble sometimes. He shook his head, unconvinced. I promised her. I promised you both. No more disappearing. No more self-destruction. Then let's get you help, Eliza said firmly. Right now. She helped him to her car, dumping the remaining alcohol in a nearby trash can. Marcus didn't resist, his earlier fire fading into quiet shame as the reality of his relapse settled in. Eliza drove him to the VA hospital's emergency department. She'd researched addiction resources when she first reconnected with Marcus, preparing for a possibility she'd hoped would never materialize. I'll stay until they admit you, she promised, as they approached the entrance. Marcus stopped walking. You can't tell Grace about this. Marcus, please, Eliza, let me tell her myself when I'm better. I don't want her to see me like this. Eliza hesitated. She's going to wonder why you're suddenly unavailable. Tell her I had to go out of town for work, a veterans conference or something. Anything but this. I don't want to lie to her. It's not a lie. It's just delayed truth. His eyes, clearer now despite the alcohol, pleaded with her. Please, I need to do this right. Eliza finally nodded. Okay, but you will tell her when you're ready. 3 days passed before Eliza heard from the rehabilitation center where Marcus had been transferred. He was doing well, the counselor reported, committed to the program. He'd be there for at least 30 days. Grace texted twice during that time, asking about meeting with both of them again. Eliza responded with the agreed-upon story, feeling the weight of the deception despite its compassionate intent. Charlotte called unexpectedly on the 4th day. Grace says Marcus is out of town, she said without preamble. Is everything okay? Something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by the explanation Grace had relayed. He's getting help, Eliza admitted, unwilling to lie to Charlotte. He had a setback with his sobriety. He didn't want Grace to know yet. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. I see. He's been sober for 8 months, Eliza added defensively. One slip doesn't erase all that progress. I'm not judging him, Eliza, Charlotte said gently. Addiction is a disease. I'm just concerned about Grace. She's getting attached to both of you. I know. We're attached to her too. Eliza hesitated. Marcus wants to tell her himself when he's completed the program. He doesn't want her to see him at his lowest. I understand that impulse, Charlotte replied. But Grace is perceptive. She senses when things aren't right. Keeping this from her might do more harm than good in the long run. Eliza considered this. What do you think we should do? I think we should trust Grace to handle difficult truths. She's young, but she's not fragile. The call to Grace was one of the hardest Eliza had ever made. She'd asked Charlotte to be present on Grace's end, to provide support if needed. Marcus is in a rehabilitation facility, Eliza explained, choosing her words carefully. He had a relapse with alcohol after receiving some difficult news. He's getting the help he needs, and he's committed to his recovery. The silence on the other end of the line stretched painfully. Grace? Eliza prompted gently. Are you still there? Yes. Grace's voice was subdued. How long will he be there? At least 30 days. Possibly longer, depending on what his counselors recommend. And? He didn't want me to know? Eliza sighed. He was ashamed. He didn't want you to see that side of him. Not when you're just getting to know each other. But it's part of who he is, Grace said quietly. The real him. Yes, Eliza agreed. It is. The struggles as well as the strengths. Another long pause. Can I write to him? Or visit? The question surprised Eliza. I think letters would be welcome. Visits might be possible later in the program. I can find out. Okay. Grace's voice was steadier now. Thank you for telling me the truth. After the call ended, Eliza sat with her phone in her hand, reflecting on the complex emotions of the past few days. She'd feared Grace's rejection, her disappointment. Instead, she'd demonstrated a maturity and compassion beyond her 15 years. Grace's first letter arrived at the rehabilitation center a week after Marcus's admission. The staff delivered it during group therapy, following their protocol for integrating outside support into the recovery process. Marcus opened it with trembling hands, expecting recrimination or worse, polite distance, the beginning of a gentle withdrawal from his life. Instead, he found understanding. I don't pretend to know what you're going through, Grace had written, but I know what it's like to have the ground shift beneath you, to question who you are and where you belong. I'm learning that healing isn't linear. Neither is finding your place in the world. I'm still figuring out how all the pieces fit together, including you. Take the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. Included with the letter was a photograph. One Marcus hadn't seen before from Grace's exhibition. It showed his hands and hers side by side on a table, the similar shape of their fingers evident despite the decades between them. Connection, continuity, possibility. Marcus shared the letter in group that day, his voice breaking as he read Grace's words aloud. The simple acceptance in her message accomplished what weeks of therapy might have struggled to achieve. It kindled hope, a reason to fight beyond mere survival. Your daughter sounds wise beyond her years, his counselor observed. She is, Marcus agreed, carefully returning the letter to its envelope. Much wiser than I was at her age. Wiser than I am now, probably. Then honor that wisdom, the counselor suggested, by doing the work you need to do here. Marcus nodded, feeling a new resolve settle over him. For 15 years, he'd searched for his daughter. Now that he'd found her, he owed her his best self. Not perfect, not unstained by past mistakes, but honest and present and fighting to be whole. That night, he wrote in his journal, a daily practice required by the program. Grace, your name, has always meant a gift freely given, unearned. Today I understood that in a new way. Your acceptance of my brokenness is a grace I don't deserve but desperately need. I promise to become worthy of it, not by being perfect, but by being truthful, not by hiding my struggles, but by showing you that they don't define me, that they don't have to define anyone. The road ahead remained difficult, the work of recovery demanding and daily, But for the first time since his relapse, Marcus felt equal to the challenge, strengthened by the unexpected grace of his daughter's compassion and the knowledge that healing, like family, could take forms he'd never anticipated. Dr. Abigail Chen's office featured muted colors, comfortable seating arranged in a circle, and absolutely nowhere to hide. Grace had chosen the armchair nearest the window, where afternoon light created the best photography conditions. Not that. She was allowed to document these sessions. Her camera remained in her bag, a silent witness. To her right sat Charlotte and Robert, her parents in every way that mattered. To her left, Eliza and Marcus, the biological connections she was still learning to understand. Marcus had been out of rehabilitation for 3 weeks, his sobriety a daily commitment he now discussed openly. It had been Grace's idea to try family therapy. If we're all going to be in each other's lives, she'd reasoned, we need to figure out how to do that without it being weird and tense all the time. Dr. Chen smiled encouragingly at the uncomfortable circle. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the courage it takes for all of you to be here. This is an unusual situation, and there's no roadmap for navigating it. That's putting it mildly, Robert muttered. Charlotte placed a hand on his knee, a silent request for patience they'd all observed many times. Let's start with a simple question, Dr. Chen continued. What does each of you hope to gain from these sessions? Silence descended as each adult waited for someone else to begin. Grace sighed internally at their hesitation. I want us to be honest with each other, she said finally, about expectations, boundaries, fears, everything. Dr. Chen nodded. Thank you, Grace. Who else? I want what's best for Grace, Charlotte offered. To help her integrate these new relationships into her life in a healthy way. I want to ensure we're all on the same page regarding Grace's well-being, Robert added, his tone carefully controlled, and to establish clear boundaries. Eliza spoke next. I want to find my place in Grace's life, whatever that looks like, without causing disruption or confusion. I want to be worthy of knowing Grace, Marcus said quietly, and to make sure my issues don't create problems for her. Dr. Chen nodded, noting responses on her pad. These are all valid goals. Now, let's dig deeper. What fears are preventing us from achieving these goals? Another silence, heavier this time. I'll start, Charlotte volunteered. I fear that as Grace connects with Eliza and Marcus, she'll feel less connected to Robert and me. That will become secondary in her heart. Grace started to protest, but Dr. Chen gently raised a hand. Let's hear everyone's fears before responding. Robert cleared his throat. I fear that Grace will be hurt, that despite everyone's best intentions, these complicated relationships will cause her pain I can't protect her from. Eliza twisted her hands in her lap. I fear overstepping, inserting myself where I don't belong, and I fear not being enough. That Grace will be disappointed by who I am compared to who she imagined. Marcus stared at the floor. I fear failing her, relapsing again, proving that I'm not someone she should have in her life. All eyes turned to Grace, who felt the weight of their concerns pressing down on her. I fear losing any of you, she admitted. I fear that you'll all keep tiptoeing around each other forever, never being real. And I fear that I'll always feel split somehow. Part Prescott, part Matthews Reed. Never whole. Dr. Chen let the rawness of these admissions settle before speaking. Thank you for your honesty. Now we have something real to work with. The next hour brought difficult conversations. Charlotte's admission that she sometimes felt threatened by Eliza's biological connection to Grace. Robert's acknowledgement of his resentment toward Marcus. Eliza's guilt about the years of absence. Marcus's struggle to find his footing as a father figure who wasn't really a father. Grace listened, sometimes interjecting, sometimes just absorbing the complicated emotions swirling around her. These people all loved her, each in their own way. That was both wonderful and terribly complicated. Grace, Dr. Chen said gently, how do you feel hearing all of this? She considered the question carefully. Responsible, she finally said. Like, everyone's happiness depends on me making the right choices, saying the right things, balancing everything perfectly. Dr. Chen nodded. That's a heavy burden for anyone, especially someone your age. It's not her responsibility to manage our feelings, Charlotte said quickly. No, it's not, Dr. Chen agreed. Which brings us to an important point. Grace is at the center of this unique family constellation, but she shouldn't be its manager. That's the adult's job. The session continued with practical discussions. How often Grace would see Eliza and Marcus, how holidays might be handled, what role they might play in school events or activities. Small steps toward a framework that could accommodate these evolving relationships. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen handed each person a journal. For our next session, I'd like you to write about a moment when you felt truly connected to Grace, and a moment when you felt distance. We'll use these as starting points for our next conversation. In the parking lot afterward, Grace noticed the adults maintaining their respective distances. Charlotte and Robert heading to their car, Eliza and Marcus to theirs. The invisible lines drawn by history and circumstance remained, despite the hour of vulnerability they'd just shared. Grace made a split-second decision, pulling out her camera. "Wait," she called. "Everyone together. Just one photo." They looked at her in surprise, then at each other uncertainly. "Please?" she added. "For me?" Slowly, awkwardly, the four adults gathered, standing stiffly as Grace framed the shot. "You have to actually stand next to each other," she directed, suppressing a smile at their discomfort. "Mom, you're next to Marcus. Dad, you're next to Eliza." They rearranged themselves according to her instructions, maintaining careful inches between their bodies. "Now everyone say dysfunctional family therapy," Grace suggested wickedly. The unexpected request broke the tension, producing startled laughs and genuine smiles, just as Grace pressed the shutter. "Thank you," she said, reviewing the image. 5 people connected by circumstance and choice. Uncomfortable but trying. A messy, imperfect family in progress. It wasn't the family portrait she'd grown up with on the Prescott living room wall. It wasn't conventional or neat or easily explained, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. The invitation came from Charlotte, surprising everyone. Sunday dinner at the Prescott home, all 5 of them together around the family table. "Are you sure about this?" Eliza asked when Charlotte called to extend the invitation. "Robert is okay with it?" "It was actually his idea," Charlotte replied. "He's making an effort." The weeks following their therapy sessions had brought gradual shifts in their complex dynamic. Robert had begun asking more questions about Marcus's work with veterans, showing genuine interest rather than reluctant tolerance. Charlotte had invited Eliza for coffee once, independent of any meeting with Grace. Small steps toward something not quite friendship, but no longer adversarial. Eliza arrived first on Sunday, carrying a homemade strawberry pie, Grace's favorite, she'd learned. Marcus followed 15 minutes later, having come directly from a veterans support group meeting. He brought a potted orchid for Charlotte, remembering she'd mentioned liking them during their last therapy session. Grace opened the door, immediately, documenting their arrivals with her ever-present camera. "Dad's trying not to hover in the kitchen," she whispered conspiratorially. Mom's told him 3 times to relax. The Prescott home felt different viewed as a guest rather than an outsider. Eliza noticed family photographs that now included several from Grace's exhibition, images that captured their emerging relationships alongside the established family moments. Robert emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Welcome," he said, with only a slight stiffness in his manner. "Dinner's almost ready." The initial awkwardness gradually eased as they settled around the table. Charlotte had prepared roast chicken with all the traditional sides, a meal that spoke of home and family and belonging. "Marcus," Charlotte said as she passed the potatoes, "Grace mentioned you're looking at apartments again?" Marcus nodded. "A different complex this time. Better track record with veterans. My counselor wrote a recommendation letter that seems to have helped." "That's excellent news," Charlotte replied with genuine warmth. "The Veterans Center offered me more hours too," Marcus added. "They're expanding their art therapy program, and they want me to help facilitate." "You'd be good at that," Robert commented, surprising everyone. "Grace showed us some of your leather work. You're talented." The simple compliment seemed to catch Marcus off guard. "Thank you," he said quietly. Eliza watched this exchange with a sense of wonder. These small moments of connection had seemed impossible just months ago. "Eliza, how are your nursing classes going?" Robert asked, continuing his unexpected role as conversation facilitator. "Well, I think. Anatomy is challenging, but fascinating." She smiled. "I wish I'd pursued this years ago." "It's never too late," Charlotte observed. "And Grace mentioned you're top of your class?" Grace's obvious delight at her parents' interest in Eliza and Marcus warmed the atmosphere further. She'd been their bridge initially, but now they were beginning to build their own tentative connections. After dinner, as Charlotte served Eliza's pie, Robert cleared his throat in the manner of someone about to make an announcement. "Charlotte and I have been thinking," he began, glancing at his wife for confirmation, "about holidays, birthdays, special occasions. We've been talking about it in our own therapy sessions too." Grace looked up sharply. "You're in therapy? Parents need support too, honey," Charlotte explained gently. "Especially when navigating uncharted territory," Robert continued. "We've realized that maintaining separate celebrations, us and you, then you with Eliza and Marcus, puts pressure on you and creates unnecessary divisions. So we'd like to propose something different," Charlotte added. "Starting with your 16th birthday next month, we'd like to host a celebration here, with all of us together." The offer hung in the air, its significance apparent to everyone. This wasn't just about a birthday party. It was about acknowledging a new family structure, unconventional, complicated, but deliberately inclusive. "That would be amazing," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. She turned to Eliza and Marcus. "If you'd want to come." "We'd be honored," Eliza answered immediately. "Absolutely," Marcus agreed. "There's more," Robert said, his expression more serious now. "We've been discussing Grace's future. College visits next year, graduation after that. These are significant milestones. We want you both to be included," Charlotte explained. "Not as afterthoughts or separate arrangements, but as part of Grace's support system." Marcus set down his fork carefully. "That's incredibly generous of you both." "It's not generosity," Robert corrected him. "It's recognition of reality. Grace needs all of us, and fighting against that only hurts her." The admission, from Robert especially, represented a seismic shift from his initial resistance to Eliza and Marcus's presence in Grace's life. "What about smaller things?" Grace asked tentatively. "Like if I wanted to have dinner with Eliza and Marcus sometimes, or if Marcus wanted to teach me leatherworking at his new apartment." "Within reason, and with proper planning, yes," Charlotte answered. "We're not suggesting complete free-for-all access. We're still your parents and responsible for your well-being. But we recognize that these relationships are important to you. And to us," Robert added quietly. After dessert, they moved to the living room, where Robert surprised them again by bringing out a camera tripod. "Grace is always behind the camera," he explained. "I thought we might take a proper group photo, all of us together." They arranged themselves awkwardly, the Prescotts on the sofa with Grace between them, Eliza and Marcus standing behind. Robert set the timer and hurried into position. "Everyone say, complicated family dynamics," Grace suggested with a grin. The resulting laughter captured in the photograph reflected something none of them had anticipated months ago, genuine moments of joy in each other's company. As the evening drew to a close, plans were made for Grace's birthday celebration, for a photography trip where Marcus would accompany Grace to a nature preserve he'd discovered during his recovery, for Eliza to attend Grace's school photography awards ceremony the following month. Standing on the porch saying their goodbyes, Eliza felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since her own fractured family had dissolved years ago. Not belonging as a Prescott, that wasn't her place, but belonging in Grace's life in a defined, accepted way. "Thank you," she said quietly to Charlotte as they hugged goodbye. A new gesture that still felt tentative, for making space for us. "Thank you for being patient while we figured things out," Charlotte replied. "It wasn't easy for any of us." "It's still not easy," Eliza acknowledged. "But it feels right," Charlotte nodded, glancing back at Grace, who was showing Marcus something on her camera. "It does, doesn't it? Not what any of us expected, but somehow fitting." As Eliza drove home, she reflected on the evening, the awkward moments alongside, the genuine connections, the careful navigation of uncharted relational territory. They were creating something without a template, a family configuration that defied easy categorization. It wasn't perfect. It might never be seamless or entirely comfortable, but it was honest and intentional and centered around love for Grace, perhaps the strongest foundation any family could hope for. The Prescott backyard had been transformed for Grace's 16th birthday celebration. Paper lanterns hung from trees, tables adorned with photographs chronicling her life. A display of her best work from the past year prominently featured. Eliza adjusted the Sweet 16 banner, smiling as Charlotte emerged from the house carrying a tray of drinks. Is this straight? Eliza asked, stepping back to assess her handiwork. Charlotte tilted her head. A little higher on the left. Perfect. The easy coordination between them reflected the year's evolution, from cautious politeness to genuine rapport. They'd never be best friends, but they'd found a comfortable alliance centered around their shared love for Grace. Marcus just texted, Eliza reported, checking her phone. He's picking up the cake now. Should be here in 20 minutes. Excellent. Robert's finishing the grill setup. Charlotte hesitated. Is Marcus doing okay? With all the festivities? The question reflected Charlotte's growing understanding of Marcus's recovery journey, his triggers, his coping mechanisms, his ongoing work to maintain sobriety. He's good, Eliza assured her. Solid. He's been looking forward to today for weeks. Marcus had indeed come far in the year since his relapse. 14 months sober now, settled in his own one-bedroom apartment, working full-time at the Veterans Center as an art therapy coordinator. His relationship with Grace had deepened through their shared artistic interests, his sketching and leatherwork complementing her photography. Inside the house, Grace was getting ready with 2 friends who would join the family celebration before the larger party later that evening. Through her partially open bedroom door, Eliza could hear laughter and music, the normal sounds of teenage life continuing alongside the extraordinary circumstances of their family structure. Robert emerged from the garage carrying a wrapped package. Where should I put the gifts? Table by the oak tree, Charlotte directed. Marcus is bringing the cake soon. Great. Robert nodded to Eliza. Need any help with those lanterns? I think we've got it covered, Eliza replied, still marveling at how far they'd come. Robert asking if she needed help would have been unimaginable a year ago. The doorbell rang, announcing Marcus's arrival. He entered carrying an elaborate cake box, his expression a mixture of pride and nervousness. The bakery did an amazing job, he said, carefully setting the box on the kitchen counter. Wait until you see it. The cake, when revealed, featured a beautifully rendered camera on top, surrounded by edible photographs from Grace's portfolio, including images of all 4 parents together at various family events throughout the year. She's going to love it, Charlotte assured him, examining the detailed work. I hope so. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of anxiety Eliza recognized from their teenage years. 16 is a big deal. Huge, Robert agreed, surprising them with his suddenly reflective tone. Seems impossible that she was just a baby. He trailed off, perhaps remembering that Eliza and Marcus hadn't been present for those early years. Marcus nodded anyway. I know what you mean. The time goes so fast. The moment of shared parental sentiment bridged decades of separation and months of careful negotiation. They might have experienced Grace's childhood from vastly different vantages, but their love for her and amazement at her growth united them in ways none had anticipated. When Grace finally emerged for her celebration, she found her uniquely blended family waiting. Charlotte and Robert, who had raised her with unwavering devotion. Eliza and Marcus, who had given her life and now offered additional layers of understanding and connection. Friends who had supported her through the complex journey of the past year. Speech, called one of her friends, as Grace prepared to blow out her candles. Grace rolled her eyes but complied, standing before the assembled guests. I'm not going to get all sappy, she began, though her expression suggested otherwise. But I do want to say thank you. To all of you. Her gaze moved deliberately around the circle, to Mom and Dad, for being exactly who I needed all my life, and for making space for more love when it arrived unexpectedly. Charlotte blinked rapidly. Robert squeezed her hand. To Eliza and Marcus, for finding me, for being patient, for showing me that family can expand in ways I never imagined. Eliza felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder, steadying them both. This year hasn't been easy, Grace continued. There were moments when I thought we'd never figure out how to do this, how to be whatever it is that we are together. She gestured to the photographs displayed around the yard, visual documentation of their evolving relationships. Grace with Eliza at a women's health fundraising walk. Marcus teaching Grace leatherworking in his apartment. All 4 adults with Grace at her school awards ceremony, their initial awkwardness giving way to genuine smiles. But we did figure it out, Grace concluded. Not perfectly, not without some drama. She grinned. But we figured it out by being honest, by putting love first, by making room for complexity instead of demanding simplicity. She raised her glass of sparkling cider. So here's to 16, to family in all its forms, and to whatever comes next. The toast was met with enthusiastic agreement, followed by the traditional birthday song and cake cutting. As the celebration continued, Eliza found herself standing slightly apart, watching the scene with a sense of wonder. Marcus joined her, following her gaze to where Grace was laughing with her friends, Charlotte and Robert, nearby. "Did you ever imagine this?" Eliza asked quietly. "When you first found her photo, when you showed up at the diner that day?" Marcus shook his head. "Never. I hoped maybe to see her from a distance, to know she was okay. This," he gestured to the gathering. "This is beyond anything I dared to hope for." "For me too," Eliza admitted. "There were so many years when I couldn't even let myself think about her. It hurt too much. And now I'm grateful for her, for the amazing young woman she's becoming, for the parents who raised her with so much love." Eliza smiled. "Even for you showing up when you did?" Marcus returned her smile. "Even with the complications I brought along?" "Even with those," she confirmed. "They're part of your story, part of what makes you who you are to Grace." Grace approached them then, camera in hand as always. "You two are missing the party," she chided gently. "Come on, we're about to play that ridiculous game Dad insists on every year." "We wouldn't miss it," Marcus assured her, allowing himself to be led back to the main gathering. Eliza followed, watching as Grace seamlessly integrated all the pieces of her expanded family, directing Robert to explain the game rules, assigning Charlotte to keep score, positioning Marcus where his height would be a strategic advantage for his team. This wasn't the future Eliza had envisioned when she'd signed adoption papers 16 years ago. It wasn't what any of them had expected when Marcus showed her that photograph in the diner a year ago. It was messier, more complicated, requiring more patience and forgiveness and flexibility than a conventional family narrative. It was also richer, more honest, more expansive in its capacity for love and understanding. As Grace's camera captured another moment of their unlikely family constellation, Eliza reflected that perhaps the most valuable gift they'd all received in this journey wasn't just reconnection, but redefinition of family, of belonging, of what it meant to love a child from different positions in her life. Not a perfect story, but a genuine one. Not a conventional family, but an authentic one. And watching Grace move confidently between the people who loved her from various vantage points, Eliza knew that ultimately, that authenticity was the greatest gift they could have given her.